The first time I realized my family had already decided my place in the world, I was standing in the hallway of my childhood home holding a manila envelope I wasn't supposed to see. Inside were legal documents, estate planning papers. My parents' names were printed neatly at the top, and right there in cold black ink was the truth they never said out loud. I wasn't included. Not as a mistake, not as an oversight. It was deliberate. If you had asked me 15 minutes earlier, I would have told you my family was complicated, but loving. That we had our differences, sure, but blood was blood. I would have defended them. I always did. I'm Claire Whitman. I was 31 years old that winter, old enough to know better, young enough to still believe that if I stayed quiet, stayed reasonable, stayed useful, things would eventually even out. They didn't. That day didn't start with a fight. It started with a favor. My mother, Helen, had asked me to stop by the house to pick up some Christmas decorations from the attic. She said her knee was acting up. My father, Robert, was out playing golf with my brother Daniel as usual. My younger sister, Emily, lived 2 states away and only came home when it suited her. I let myself in, with the spare key I'd never bothered to return. The house smelled the same as always. Pine cleaner, old books, control disguised as comfort. I climbed the stairs, pulled down a box of ornaments, and that was when I saw the envelope on the desk in my father's study. Open, sloppy, like someone assumed no one would look. My name has never been hard to spell. 5 letters. Claire. It wasn't there. Daniel's was. Emily's was. Even a line for future grandchildren. Trust allocations, percentages, conditions. I stood there longer than I should have, long enough for my hands to stop shaking and for something colder to settle in. This wasn't new. It was just finally visible. Growing up, Daniel was the responsible one. The heir. The one my father groomed to take over parts of the family business, a mid-sized logistics company my grandfather had built from scratch. Emily was the sparkling one. The favorite. The one who could do no wrong even when she did. And me, I was the reasonable one, the flexible one, the one who didn't need much. That's what they told me. Claire understands. Claire doesn't make things difficult. Claire will be fine. I closed the envelope exactly how I found it and carried the box of decorations downstairs. My mother smiled when she saw me already talking about Christmas dinner plans, about Daniel bringing his wife and kids, about Emily, maybe flying in if her schedule allowed. She didn't notice my face, or maybe she did and chose not to. I left without saying anything. On the drive home, my phone buzzed, a text from Daniel. Dad wants to talk to you soon, about some paperwork, nothing urgent. That was the moment I knew. They weren't hiding it anymore. They just assumed I'd fall in line. If I had been weaker, I would have confronted them that night. Asked why. Asked what I'd done wrong. Asked when I stopped counting. But that wasn't how this story was going to go. Because I was tired. Tired of being the afterthought. Tired of earning my place through silence. At the time, my life looked stable from the outside. I worked as a project manager for a regional construction firm in Ohio. Not glamorous, but steady. I paid my bills. I owned a small townhouse I'd bought myself after my divorce 3 years earlier. No help, no loans from my parents. I'd learned early that accepting anything from them came with expectations I couldn't afford. My marriage had ended quietly. No scandal, no betrayal, just the slow realization that I was doing all the emotional work while my husband enjoyed the benefits. When I left, my mother told me I hadn't tried hard enough. My father said divorce was inconvenient. Daniel said nothing at all. So I rebuilt, alone, carefully. That's why what happened next hurt more than I expected. 2 days after Christmas, my father called me into his office. Daniel was already there, seated comfortably, legs crossed like he owned the place. Maybe he did. My father didn't waste time. We're updating the will, he said, tapping a folder on the desk. It's just standard planning. I nodded. I didn't ask questions. We've decided Daniel will take on a larger role, he continued, given his experience and family situation. Still, I nodded. My mother added softly but firmly, Emily will be supported as well. She has potential. And then there was a pause, the kind that assumes agreement. My father slid a document toward me. We'll need your signature as a witness. That was the first insult. Not even an explanation. Not even the courtesy of pretending my exclusion wasn't intentional. I wasn't a beneficiary. I was administrative support. I looked down at the paper, then back at them. What about me? I asked. The room shifted, not dramatically, just enough. My mother's lips tightened. Claire, you're independent. You've always been. Daniel didn't look at me at all. My father sighed like I was a problem he didn't have time for. You don't need this kind of support. We thought you'd understand. Understand. That word has followed me my entire life like a leash. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I smiled. I'll think about it, I said, and stood up. On my way out, I noticed something else on the desk. Another folder, this one labeled with the company's name, the family business, recent valuations, legal notes. That was when the second realization hit. This wasn't just about inheritance. It was about control. And they had underestimated me. When I got home, I didn't pour a drink or call a friend. I opened my laptop and searched for one thing. Estate attorney, Columbus, Ohio. By the time the sun went down, I had scheduled a consultation. I hadn't decided what I was going to do yet, but for the first time in my life, I stopped trying to be understood. And that changed everything. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was angry. Anger burns hot and loud. What kept me awake was something colder, heavier. A quiet recalibration, like my mind was rearranging the furniture after realizing the house had never been mine. By morning, the shock had worn off. What remained was clarity. I arrived at the attorney's office 10 minutes early, sat in my car, and watched people walk past with coffee cups and briefcases. Normal lives, ordinary mornings. No one knew I was about to redraw the boundaries of my own family. The attorney's name was Mark Ellis, mid-50s, calm voice, no theatrics, exactly what I needed. He didn't interrupt while I explained. He let me talk about the will, about the business, about being asked to sign as a witness to my own exclusion, about the way my family had always spoken in assumptions, never questions. When I finished, he folded his hands and said one sentence that landed harder than anything my parents had ever said to me. They've been preparing for this longer than you think. I didn't argue. He explained the mechanics, trust structures, beneficiary designations, how families often formalize favoritism under the banner of logic, succession planning disguised as fairness. Then he asked me something unexpected. Do you know how your grandfather's original will was written? I shook my head. He left equal shares to all his children, Mark said. Your father restructured the company later. Perfectly legal, but there may be leverage if assets were transferred improperly or if coercion was involved. Leverage. I didn't smile. I didn't ask for revenge. I asked for information. Before you do anything, Mark continued, do not sign anything, and don't confront them yet. People reveal more when they think you're compliant. That word again, compliant. I thanked him, paid the consultation fee, and walked out lighter than I had in weeks. Over the next few days, I played my role perfectly. I answered my mother's calls. I listened while she talked about seating arrangements for a late Christmas dinner they were hosting to bring everyone together. I nodded while my father emailed reminders about documents they needed quickly. Daniel sent a message asking if I'd had time to review the papers. I replied with one sentence. I'm looking them over. That was enough. What none of them knew was that I had started pulling threads. I called my Aunt Margaret, my father's older sister, the one who'd moved to Arizona years ago and stopped attending family holidays. We'd never been close, but she'd always been honest. When I mentioned the will, she laughed, not amused, bitter. So he finally made it official, she said. That told me everything. She explained how my grandfather had wanted all his grandchildren protected, how my father had convinced him that consolidating control was efficient, how Margaret herself had been quietly pushed aside when she asked too many questions. He doesn't like witnesses, she said, only participants. That night, Daniel invited me to dinner, just the two of us. We met at a steakhouse near his office. He ordered confidently, like he always did, talked about the kids, about expansion plans, about how stressful it was to carry responsibility. At some point, he leaned back and said, You know this isn't personal, right? I looked at him. My brother, 2 years older, same house, same parents, completely different childhood. Of course, I said. He smiled relieved. You've always been adaptable. That's your strength. There it was. Adaptable, useful, disposable. He lowered his voice. Between us, Mom and Dad worry you'd make things complicated if you had a stake. You question too much. I nodded, sipping my water. Inside, something clicked into place. They weren't punishing me for failure. They were preemptively disarming me for competence. After dinner, Daniel hugged me, the kind of hug meant to seal an agreement. I let him believe it worked. Over the next week, emails started coming more frequently. Not aggressive, just insistent. My mother asked when I'd be available to finalize things. My father sent calendar invites with titles like Estate Review. Emily finally chimed in from wherever she was that month. "Don't drag this out, Claire. It's awkward for everyone." I didn't respond. Instead, I met Mark again. This time he had documents laid out. Copies of older filings, business records that showed asset transfers made during my grandfather's decline, signatures that didn't quite match, dates that raised questions. "Nothing illegal on its own," he said carefully. "But patterns matter." I stared at the paperwork. This wasn't about suing my family into oblivion. That wasn't who I was. But I wasn't going to quietly disappear either. "What are my options?" I asked. Mark didn't rush his answer. "You can contest later," he said. "But that's messy. Or you can act now, secure what's yours outside of the will. You own shares from your grandfather's original structure. Small but meaningful. They've assumed you forgot." I hadn't forgotten. I'd just been told they didn't matter. "They're trying to consolidate before year-end," he added. That's why the pressure. That night I went home and opened an old box I'd kept from my grandmother. Letters, notes, a faded copy of a trust summary she'd once insisted I keep just in case. At the time, I'd thought it was sentimental. It was strategic. The next morning, I emailed my parents. "I'm ready to talk. Let's meet this Friday." My mother replied within minutes. "So glad, sweetheart. We knew you'd come around." I stared at the screen, then closed the laptop. I wasn't coming around. I was coming prepared. By Friday, the atmosphere in my parents' living room was thick with expectation. My father had his files. My mother had her calm voice ready. Daniel sat confidently beside them. Emily joined via video call, her face perfectly composed. They smiled when I walked in. I smiled back. My father slid the documents toward me. "Just a few signatures," he said. I picked up the pen and paused. I had a chance to review everything I said evenly, with counsel. The room stilled. My mother blinked. "Counsel." "Yes," I said. "And before I sign anything, I need clarification on my existing equity from Grandpa's original trust." Silence. Daniel's jaw tightened. My father leaned back slowly. "That's old history." "Not legally," I replied. Emily's voice crackled through the speaker. "Why are you doing this?" I looked at her face on the screen. My sister, the favorite. "Because I'm done pretending I don't see what's happening," I said. No shouting, no accusations. Just truth. My father closed the folder. "This is unnecessary," he has said. I stood up. "So is my signature," I replied. As I walked out, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not victory, leverage. And I knew without a doubt this was only the beginning. The first thing my mother did after I left was stop calling. Not angrily, not dramatically, just silence. It was the same tactic she'd used my entire life when she didn't get her way. Withdraw warmth, remove access. Let the absence do the work. If I had been 22, I would have panicked, apologized, tried to smooth things over. At 31, I noticed something else. They didn't threaten me. They stalled. That told me more than any argument could have. For the next 2 weeks, nothing happened on the surface. No emails, no meetings, no pressure. Daniel didn't text. Emily didn't send passive-aggressive messages. My father didn't follow up about documents. Outwardly, it looked like peace. Internally, I knew better. Families like mine don't back off. They regroup. I kept going to work. I kept my routines. I didn't post on social media. I didn't talk to mutual acquaintances. I became boring on purpose. And quietly, I kept digging. Mark introduced me to a forensic accountant named Lila Gomez. She had sharp eyes and a voice that never softened her conclusions. She reviewed the old trust documents, the company's restructuring records, and the timeline of my grandfather's decline. After our second meeting, she looked up from her screen and said, "They assumed you wouldn't challenge this because challenging it would mean acknowledging the imbalance." I nodded. She tapped the file. "There's more." It turned out my grandfather had placed a minority share of the company into a holding structure that listed all grandchildren as contingent beneficiaries. The language was old-fashioned, easy to overlook, convenient to forget. Daniel's shares were clean. Emily's future interest was clearly documented. Mine sat in limbo, not removed, just ignored. "They need your signature to collapse that structure," Lila said. "Without it, consolidation is incomplete." That explained the urgency, the friendliness, the sudden interest in my cooperation. I wasn't being excluded because I was irrelevant. I was being excluded because I was inconvenient. 3 days later, my father called. His voice was different, less authoritative, almost careful. "Claire," he said, "your mother's been upset." I waited. "We don't want this to turn into something adversarial." There it was. "I don't either," I said. "That's why I haven't signed anything." He sighed. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. No, I replied. I'm seeing it clearly. Silence. Then he said something he hadn't said in years. What do you want? Not what do you deserve? Not what's fair? What do you want? I want my interests acknowledged, I said. Formally, in writing. That would complicate things, he said. I almost laughed. Then they were already complicated, I replied. That night, Daniel showed up at my townhouse, unannounced. He stood on my porch like he belonged there. Like this was another space he could step into without asking. You blindsided them, he said, not bothering with a greeting. I didn't invite him in. I asked a question, I replied. They didn't like the answer. He ran a hand through his hair. You don't understand how this works. I leaned against the doorframe. Then explain it. He hesitated. That was new. Finally, he said Dad promised investors full consolidation by the end of the quarter. Your piece is a loose end. There it was. Not family, not fairness, business. And if I don't cooperate, I asked. He looked at me, then really looked at me. Not as the adaptable sister. Not as the reasonable one. As a variable. You'll force a delay, he said. Possibly expose things that don't need exposure. Like what I asked calmly. His jaw tightened. You're being selfish, he said. I smiled thin and precise. I've been selfless my entire life. Look where that got me. He left without another word. The next move came from my mother. She invited me to lunch, neutral ground, a cafe halfway between our houses. She arrived early, already seated, already composed. She talked about her health, about stress, about how families fall apart over money. When she finally looked at me, her eyes were sharp. You're risking your relationship with us, she said. I met her gaze. You already did. She frowned. That's not fair. No, I agreed. It's accurate. She leaned forward. If you push this, Daniel will never forgive you. I shrugged. He hasn't noticed me in years. That was when her mask slipped. You've always resented your siblings, she snapped. This is about jealousy. I didn't argue. I didn't deny it. I said something else instead. This is about being treated like an adult. She stared at me like she didn't recognize me. Lunch ended quietly. 2 days later, Mark called me. They've retained outside counsel, he said. Aggressive, but not reckless. I exhaled slowly. What does that mean, I asked. It means they expected you to fold, he replied. And now they're recalculating. That night, I sat alone in my living room, documents spread across the table. Not just legal papers, but old birthday cards, family photos, evidence of a lifetime of conditional belonging. I thought about every Thanksgiving where my seat was an afterthought. Every birthday forgotten. Every achievement quietly minimized so someone else could shine brighter. This wasn't revenge. It was accounting. The next morning, I sent one email. Subject representation. I CC'd my parents, Daniel, Emily, and their attorney. All further communication regarding my interests should go through my counsel. I didn't add anything else. Within minutes, my phone lit up. I turned it off. For the first time, the silence felt like mine. And somewhere beneath the calm, I felt it building. Not anger. Momentum. Whatever they planned next, it wouldn't be quiet. The first letter arrived on a Monday morning, slid neatly under my door like something polite, pretending not to be a threat. It was from my parents' attorney, carefully worded. Neutral tone, a request for cooperation, an assurance that no one wished to escalate matters unnecessarily. I read it once, then I set it aside and went to work. That was the shift they didn't anticipate. They were used to emotional reactions, tears, defensiveness, guilt. What they weren't prepared for was distance. Over the next week, 3 more letters arrived, each one slightly firmer than the last. Deadlines. Language about delays affecting multiple stakeholders. An undercurrent of pressure dressed up as professionalism. Mark reviewed each one and smiled without warmth. They're posturing, he said. Trying to make you blink. I didn't blink. Instead, Lila uncovered something else. It started with a routine review of dividend statements from years earlier. Small amounts, inconsistent timing, notes that didn't align with the official distribution schedule. Someone's been rerouting income, she said, tapping her screen. Not illegally, just selectively. To Daniel, quietly, strategically. He'd been compensated long before his role was formalized. My grandfather's structure had been treated like a suggestion, not a rule. That's not criminal, I said. No, Lila agreed. But it's leverage. That word again. The next escalation came through Emily. She called me late one evening, her voice sharp and brittle. You're ruining everything, she said, without preamble. I held the phone away from my ear for a moment, then brought it back. Good to hear from you, too. You don't even need this, she snapped. You have your little job. Your little house. I closed my eyes briefly. I didn't ask for your assessment, I said. She scoffed. This was always Daniel's responsibility. You know that. Then why do they need my signature, I asked. Silence. You're being dramatic, she said finally. Mom's barely sleeping. I thought of all the nights I'd spent awake managing my own losses alone. I'm not responsible for her sleep, I replied. She hung up on me. 2 days later, Mark called me into his office. They're offering a settlement, he said. I raised an eyebrow. Already? Provisional, he clarified. A buyout of your interest. Clean exit. He slid the document across the desk. The number was respectable. Generous, even. Enough to make most people grateful. Enough to make me disappear. They want certainty, Mark continued. They want to close the books. And control the narrative, I added. He nodded. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I asked for time. That evening, I drove past the old family home without stopping. The lights were on. Daniel's car in the driveway. The house looked exactly as it always had. Solid. Untouched. A monument to decisions made without me. I thought about my grandfather. The way he'd insisted on equal chairs at the table. The way my father had slowly replaced that with hierarchy and silence. I didn't want money. I wanted acknowledgement. The next morning, I sent a counter-proposal. Not for more cash. For transparency. Full disclosure of past distributions. Formal recognition of my share. A seat at the table, even if I chose not to sit in it. The response was immediate. My father called. His voice was tight. This is unnecessary. Then it shouldn't be a problem, I replied. You're forcing us into a corner, he said. No, I said calmly. I'm stepping out of one. There was a long pause. Then he said something revealing. People will talk. I smiled to myself. They already are, I said. That was when the tone changed. The next letter wasn't polite. It warned of litigation, of costs, of consequences. Mark read it and nodded. They've moved from persuasion to intimidation. Good, I said. Because intimidation meant fear, and fear meant they were losing control. That night, Daniel emailed me directly. No CCs, no attorneys. We need to talk, just us. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded it to Mark. Let them learn what boundaries look like. On Friday afternoon, as I was packing up to leave work, Lila called. I found something else, she said. Her voice was different this time, sharper. There's a side agreement, she continued. Off the books. Your father and a private investor. The consolidation isn't just internal. They're prepping for a partial sale. I leaned against my desk. And my signature, I asked. Would finalize it, she said. Without you, they can't proceed cleanly. I closed my eyes. So that was it? This wasn't about inheritance. It was about timing. They hadn't excluded me because I didn't matter. They excluded me because I mattered too much. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. Because I finally understood the shape of the game. And once you see the board clearly, the outcome stops being emotional. It becomes inevitable. By Monday, I was ready to make my next move. And it wouldn't be quiet. I didn't announce my next move. I let it surface naturally the way inconvenient truths always do. On Monday morning, Mark sent a formal notice to my parents' attorney requesting documentation related to the side agreement Lila had uncovered. Nothing accusatory, just precise. Dates, entities, signatories. By noon, my phone was vibrating nonstop. I didn't answer. At 2 o'clock, my father showed up at my office. That was a line he had never crossed before. He stood in the lobby, coat still on jaw set, looking smaller than I remembered. Age does that when authority slips. I stepped outside with him closing the glass door behind us. You embarrassed me, he said quietly. I tilted my head. How? You went around us, he replied. You made this public. I made it professional, I said. He stared at me like I'd spoken another language. This was supposed to stay in the family, he said. That's what you said when you cut me out, I replied. It didn't. His eyes hardened. You're forcing us into litigation. I met his gaze. You already did. I just acknowledged it. We stood there, the sound of traffic filling the space between us. Finally, he said something I hadn't expected. You weren't supposed to be a problem. Not you're wrong. Not you're hurting us. A problem. That word settled everything. I'm not a problem, I said evenly. I'm a stakeholder. He left without another word. That afternoon, Mark called. They're backing off of the sale, he said. Temporarily. Good, I replied. Don't celebrate yet, he warned. They're recalibrating. They always did. That evening, Emily posted photos on social media. A family dinner. My parents. Daniel, smiling. The caption read, grateful for what really matters. I blocked her. It wasn't dramatic. It was practical. The next escalation came quietly through paperwork. My parents' attorney proposed mediation. Neutral third party, confidential, framed as an olive branch. Mark raised an eyebrow when he read it. They want to control the environment, he said. Limit exposure. Let them try, I replied. We agreed to attend. The mediation took place in a windowless office with beige walls and a long table designed to keep everyone seated. My parents arrived together. Daniel came alone. Emily appeared via video again, arms crossed, face tight. The mediator, a middle-aged woman with a calm voice, laid out the ground rules. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it simple. I'm not here to punish anyone, I said. I'm here to clarify my position. My mother exhaled loudly as if relieved. I have a legal interest that predates recent restructuring, I continued. I've been asked to sign documents that would dissolve that interest without disclosure. I declined. That's it. Daniel leaned forward. You're overcomplicating this. I looked at him. Then simplify it. Acknowledge my share. My father interjected. That share was symbolic. Then it cost you nothing to formalize it, I replied. Silence. The mediator looked between us. We're and Mrs. Whitman. My mother spoke. Claire has always been independent. We assumed she didn't want entanglement. I nodded. You didn't ask. Daniel sighed. What do you want exactly? I slid a single page across the table. Recognition, access to records, and an option. An option to retain my share or sell it at fair market value after full disclosure. No theatrics, no emotion, just terms. Emily scoffed on the screen. You're threatening us. No, I said. I'm opting in. That was when the mediator did something interesting. She leaned back and said, given the information presented, I recommend disclosure before any further consolidation. My father's face tightened. The meeting ended without resolution, but the tone had shifted. They weren't united anymore. That night, Daniel called me. His voice was low, controlled. You're putting the company at risk, he said. I paused. Is that what you're worried about? He didn't answer. Because if it is, I continued, you should have included me from the beginning. He exhaled sharply. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. I thought of all the pressure I'd carried quietly for years. I understand it perfectly, I said. I just didn't inherit protection. He hung up. The next morning, Lila sent me an updated report. The investor had withdrawn interest. The uncertainty was too great. The leverage had worked, but leverage is a tool, not a destination. I had to decide what I actually wanted. Money would be easy, clean, final. But something else had begun to matter more. Autonomy. I didn't want a payout that let them erase me. I wanted a boundary they couldn't cross again. That afternoon, I met Mark in his office. I'm not selling, I said. He nodded. Then we prepare for pressure. I know, I replied, but I'm not walking away. As I left his office, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. We need to talk, privately, just us. I stared at the screen. This wasn't about reconciliation. This was about control, one last attempt. I replied with one sentence. You can speak to my attorney. I turned the phone face down and kept walking. For the first time, they weren't leading. They were reacting, and the tables were only just beginning to turn. The pressure didn't come all at once. It came in layers, like they were testing which version of me would reappear if they pushed hard enough. First was guilt. My mother left a voicemail, her voice soft wounded. She talked about my childhood, about sacrifices, about how families survived by sticking together when things got hard. She never mentioned the will, or the company, or the documents. She framed it as heartbreak. I deleted the message. Then came concern. An email from my father copied to Daniel asking if I was well, suggesting stress might be clouding my judgment, recommending I take some time before making irreversible decisions. I forwarded it to Mark. After that came the practical threat. Their attorney sent notice that delays were creating financial strain and that my continued non-cooperation could expose me to liability if deals collapsed. Mark called me within minutes. They're bluffing, he said, but they're getting closer to the line. Good, I replied. Let them show their hand. That was when something unexpected happened. A woman named Ruth Caldwell contacted me. She was my grandfather's former executive assistant, retired, in her 70s. She'd found my email through a mutual acquaintance and wasn't sure if she should reach out. I don't want to cause trouble, she said on the phone, but I've been watching what's happening. I listened. She told me about meetings she'd sat in decades earlier, about how my grandfather insisted on fairness, about arguments he'd had with my father when succession plans were first discussed. He worried about you, she said gently, said you were observant, that you noticed things others missed. My throat tightened, but I didn't interrupt. He left instructions. She continued. Not everything was followed. She didn't have documents, but she had emails, notes, calendars, context. Mark nearly smiled when I shared them. They won't change the law, he said, but they strengthen your narrative. That night, Daniel came back. Not to my house this time. He showed up at my workplace again, waiting in the parking lot when I left. This has gone too far, he said as I approached my car. I didn't unlock it. You're hurting Mom, he continued. She cries every night. I met his eyes. Where were those tears when I was being erased? That's not fair, he snapped. No, I agreed. It's consistent. He lowered his voice. What will it take for you to stop? I considered him. My brother. The golden child. The one trained to carry the family name without question. It's not about stopping, I said. It's about not being pushed. He clenched his fists. You don't belong in this fight. That was the moment something in him cracked. Neither did you, I replied quietly, until you made it unavoidable. He stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Not as a sister, as an obstacle. You think you've won something, he said, but once this is over, you won't have a family left. I unlocked my car. I didn't have one when this started, I said, and drove away. The next day, Mark called with an update. They've requested a closed-door hearing, he said. Pre-litigation. They want to pressure you into settlement. I exhaled slowly. Let's go, I said. The hearing was quiet. No jury, no public gallery. Just lawyers' documents and a judge who didn't care about family dynamics. That was the point. When my father's attorney spoke, he framed the situation as a misunderstanding, an emotional overreaction, a daughter confused about structures she didn't fully grasp. When it was Mark's turn, he didn't raise his voice. He laid out timelines, agreements, requests for signatures, the side deal, the lack of disclosure. He ended with one sentence. My client is not asking for more than what already exists. She is asking not to be erased. The judge leaned back. I recommend disclosure and a pause on consolidation, she said, until matters are resolved. It wasn't a ruling, but it was a warning. Afterward, my parents didn't approach me. Daniel didn't either. They left separately. That night, I sat alone in my townhouse, the quiet heavier than usual. I thought I'd feel triumphant. I didn't. What I felt was distance. The kind that doesn't hurt anymore, because you finally understand it was always there. My phone buzzed once. A text from Emily. You've made your point. Don't destroy what's left. I typed a reply, then erased it. I wasn't here to make points. I was here to take my place. And I finally understood something that had taken me 3 decades to learn. People who benefit from your silence will always call your boundaries cruelty. The next step wouldn't be loud. It would be final. And once I took it, there would be no going back. The silence after the hearing was different from the others. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't manipulation. It was assessment. My family was measuring loss. For nearly 2 weeks, no one contacted me. No emails routed through attorneys. No indirect messages. No social media performances aimed at guilt. Even Emily went quiet. That told me more than confrontation ever could. When control fails, people stop talking and start calculating. I used that time carefully. Mark and I met twice to map outcomes. Not emotional ones, structural ones. What it would look like if I stayed partially invested. What it would look like if I forced a buyout later. What it would cost them in time, credibility, and leverage. Lila updated projections. Without full consolidation, the company's valuation stalled. Investors hate uncertainty. Banks do too. They assumed you'd trade peace for cash, she said. Now they're realizing peace isn't for sale. At work, my focus sharpened. Something about reclaiming one area of my life made the rest fall into place. My supervisor noticed. I was put on a new project, given authority I hadn't asked for, but had earned. That mattered more than I expected. Then the invitation arrived. Not from my parents, from the company. A formal notice requesting my presence at the quarterly board meeting. Observer status. Daniel hadn't signed it himself. It came from corporate counsel. Clean, procedural, neutral. Mark read it once and nodded. They're legitimizing you, he said. Not because they want to, because they have to. I accepted. The boardroom was on the top floor of a glass building downtown. I'd driven past it dozens of times, never once imagining I'd sit inside. Daniel was already there when I arrived. So was my father. Neither stood when I entered. That was fine. I took the seat assigned to me. Not at the head, not at the corner, but at the table. The meeting was dry. Financials, logistics, projections. I listened, took notes, asked one question near the end about a delayed contract. The room shifted slightly. They hadn't expected participation. Afterward, Daniel pulled me aside. This doesn't mean you belong here, he said under his breath. I met his eyes. It already does. He didn't reply. That night, my mother called for the first time in weeks. I let it go to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. 2 days later, she tried again. This time I answered. Her voice was tired, stripped of performance. "I don't recognize you anymore," she said. I leaned back against my kitchen counter. "You never tried to." She inhaled sharply. "We gave you everything." "No," I said calmly. "You gave me conditions." Silence. "I raised you to be grateful," she said. "And I learned to be careful," I replied. She started crying then. Real tears this time, or close enough. "You're tearing this family apart," she said. I didn't argue. "I'm stepping out of the role you assigned me," I said. "What happens next is your choice." She whispered my name. I ended the call. That night, I made my decision. Not in anger, not in triumph. In clarity. The next morning, Mark filed notice. I was exercising my right to retain my interest. Not selling, not transferring. Retaining. It triggered a clause buried deep in the original structure. One my father had likely hoped would never be activated. It required governance changes, oversight, transparency. My presence wasn't symbolic anymore. It was procedural. Daniel called within the hour. "You can't do this," he said. "I already did," I replied. "You're forcing a restructure," he snapped. "Yes," I said. "That's what happens when you ignore stakeholders." He went quiet, then softer. "What do you want from us?" The question sounded different now. Smaller. "I want distance," I said, "and respect." "That's it," he asked. "That's everything," I replied. He didn't respond. The fallout was immediate. The sale was officially paused. Internal audits were scheduled. Legal costs rose. Meetings multiplied. The company survived, but the myth of effortless control was gone. And with it, the version of my family that depended on my silence. Emily finally texted, "I hope you're happy." I didn't reply. Happiness had nothing to do with it. This was about standing where I'd always been told not to stand. The next chapter wouldn't be about confrontation. It would be about consequences. And for the first time, I wouldn't be absorbing them. They would. The consequences didn't explode. They unraveled. That was the part no one warns you about. When control slips, it doesn't always shatter. Sometimes it frays thread by thread until the shape you thought was solid can't hold itself together anymore. The first sign was Daniel. He stopped speaking in absolutes. At the next board meeting, he deferred more than usual, asked for clarification instead of issuing directives. The tone shifted from command to caution. Investors noticed. So did lenders. Confidence, it turns out, is contagious. So is uncertainty. My father attended that meeting but said very little. He watched instead, listened, took notes like someone suddenly aware that the room no longer revolved around him. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. The second sign came from outside. A regional business journal published a short piece about governance changes at the company. Nothing scandalous, just enough to suggest internal adjustment. That article did more damage than any lawsuit ever could. Because it introduced doubt, people started asking questions my father had spent decades preventing. Not accusations, inquiries, the kind that require answers. At home, my life simplified. Without the constant pull of family obligation, my evenings were quiet, not lonely, intentional. I cooked for myself, read, took long walks. I noticed how much energy I'd been spending anticipating reactions that never came. That was the strangest part. Once I stopped playing my role, the script collapsed. My mother didn't call again. Emily removed me from a shared family album. Daniel sent one email through counsel requesting a timeline for future disclosures. It was professional, distant. That was fine. Then came the third sign, a letter addressed to me at home, handwritten, from my grandmother's estate attorney. He'd heard about the restructuring, about my involvement, about questions being raised. He enclosed a copy of a memorandum my grandmother had written years before her death. It wasn't legally binding, but it was clear she had anticipated this. She'd warned about consolidation without consensus, about sidelining voices in the name of efficiency, about confusing leadership with entitlement. She'd written my name once, not as a beneficiary, as a safeguard. I read the letter twice, then placed it carefully in a folder Mark had prepared. "You don't need this to win," he said when I showed him. "I know," I replied, "but it matters." Because it wasn't about leverage anymore. It was about confirmation. That evening, Daniel called me directly. No anger this time, no accusation. "Just fatigue. This is costing more than we expected," he said. I waited. Dad stepping back, he continued, "Health reasons." That landed heavier than I thought it would. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Silence stretched. "I didn't think it would end like this," he said. "It didn't end," I replied. "It changed." He exhaled slowly. "You could have taken the money." "I know," I said. Why didn't you? He asked. I thought about it. Because disappearing would have confirmed everything you believe about me, I said. He didn't argue. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted. That's not my job, I said gently. After the call, I sat in the quiet and realized something else had shifted. I wasn't waiting anymore. For apologies, for understanding, for reconciliation. I was moving. The next week, I accepted a new role at work. A promotion I'd been offered months earlier, but had delayed because of family commitments. The irony wasn't lost on me. With the added income, I refinanced my townhouse, cleared the last of my debts. Independence felt tangible in a way it never had before. Then the final sign arrived. An envelope from my parents. No return address. Inside was a single note written in my mother's careful hand. We never meant to hurt you. No explanation, no accountability, just distance disguised as closure. I folded the note and placed it in a drawer with the others. Some things don't need responses. The board voted the following month to formalize oversight. Committees, reporting requirements, a structure that didn't depend on one voice. Daniel supported it publicly. My father abstained. And I sat there not triumphant, not bitter. Present. That was the revenge no one talks about. Not destruction. Replacement. Replacing silence with structure. Replacing compliance with clarity. Replacing roles with choice. The family I'd known no longer existed. But neither did the version of me they'd depended on. And that was irreversible. The next chapter wouldn't be about them. It would be about what happens when you stop negotiating your worth and start living from it. When people talk about closure, they imagine a door gently shutting. That wasn't how it happened. What I felt instead was space. Unfamiliar. Slightly disorienting. Like stepping out of a room that had been crowded for so long I'd forgotten what quiet sounded like. The company adjusted faster than I expected. Structures have a way of revealing what was always unstable once weight shifts. Committees formed, reports circulated, questions were asked out loud instead of behind closed doors. Nothing dramatic, just daylight. Daniel adapted because he had no choice. At the third board meeting after the restructuring, he spoke differently. Slower, more careful with his language. He asked instead of declared. I watched him learning in real time what leadership looked like without inherited certainty. My father stopped attending altogether. Officially, it was health. Unofficially, it was loss of control. I didn't reach out. That was another boundary I held without announcing. Around that time, a memory resurfaced that I hadn't thought about in years. A Thanksgiving when I was 16. My grandfather had asked each of us what we wanted to do when we grew up. Daniel talked about the company. Emily talked about travel. When it was my turn, I said I wanted to understand how systems worked, how decisions got made. My father had laughed. Now, decades later, that answer finally made sense to everyone else. The family silence continued, but it changed texture. It wasn't punitive anymore. It was avoidance. Emily posted carefully curated photos of holidays without me. Daniel stopped mentioning me in conversation. My mother stopped asking mutual acquaintances about my life. I existed, just not in their narrative. That was the cost. And the relief? At work, my promotion settled into reality. I managed larger teams, negotiated contracts, sat in rooms where people expected me to speak, and listened when I did. One afternoon, after a particularly tense meeting, my supervisor pulled me aside. You're good under pressure, he said. Where did you learn that? I thought about it. At home, I replied. He laughed, assuming it was a joke. I didn't correct him. The first real test of my resolve came in the spring. My mother's sister, Aunt Lorraine, passed away unexpectedly. She had been a quiet presence in my life. Not close, but kind. The funeral was held in the same church where I had spent most of my childhood. I debated going, not because I was afraid of seeing my family, because I didn't want to pretend. In the end, I went. I arrived early and sat near the back. I didn't announce myself. I didn't seek anyone out. My mother saw me first. Her face tightened, then softened. She stood hesitated, then walked toward me. You came, she said? Yes, I replied. She looked older, smaller. The authority she used to carry had dulled. We didn't know if you would, she said. I didn't either, I admitted. We stood there, surrounded by murmured condolences and the smell of flowers. I miss you, she said quietly. I believed her. I miss who I was allowed to be with you, I replied. Her eyes filled. We did the best we could. I know, I said. It just wasn't enough. She nodded, as if she'd been expecting that answer for years. We didn't hug. We returned to our seats. Daniel avoided me. Emily didn't attend. After the service, my mother touched my arm briefly before leaving. No promises were made. No wounds reopened. It was enough. That night, I went home and sat on my porch as the sun went down. I thought about all the times I'd imagined confrontations, speeches, vindication. None of it mattered now. What mattered was this: I had chosen myself, and the world had adjusted. A few weeks later, Mark called me with final paperwork. Everything was in place. My interest was secure, my role defined. No further action required unless I initiated it. "You're done," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm stable." "There's a difference." That summer, I took my first real vacation alone. Not to escape, to experience. I drove north, rented a small place near the water, and spent days reading, thinking, walking. No one needed me to perform. No one needed me to fix anything. One evening, as I watched the sky darken over the lake, my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. Dad's selling his shares, fully retiring. I stared at the screen. That was it then. The final relinquishing. I typed a response. "I hope he finds peace." Daniel replied a few minutes later. "I hope you have." I put the phone down. For the first time, I didn't feel like a reaction to my family. I felt like a person moving forward. The next chapter wouldn't be about legacy. It would be about choice. And what comes after you stop waiting for permission. When my father sold his shares, the family narrative officially collapsed. No announcement was made, no farewell dinner, no speech about legacy. The transaction was handled quietly, efficiently, the way things are done when no one wants attention drawn to the reasons. Daniel informed the board. The market adjusted, life went on. But inside the family, something else shifted. My mother stopped pretending. She didn't reach out often, but when she did, her tone was different, less directive, less certain, like someone speaking without a script. One afternoon, she called and asked if I wanted to have lunch. Not to talk, just to eat. I agreed. We met at a small cafe near the river. She arrived early, already seated, hands folded around a cup of tea. She didn't comment on my appearance, didn't ask about work. She waited. "I didn't protect you," she said finally. I looked at her, surprised, not by the words, but by how simply she said them. "You protected the system," I replied. She nodded. I thought that was the same thing. We ate quietly for a while. "I don't know how to be your mother without telling you what to do," she admitted. "That's not something I can teach you," I said. She accepted that. We didn't leave as mother and daughter reconciled. We left as two adults who understood the limits of each other. That was enough. At the company, a new rhythm settled in. Without my father's presence, Daniel carried the weight alone. He was competent, capable, but no longer insulated. He asked for my input twice that quarter, not because he had to, because he wanted stability. I gave it, carefully, without overstepping. Power, I'd learned, doesn't need to be loud. It needs to be consistent. Emily sent me a message in late summer. "I'm getting married." No greeting, no apology. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "Congratulations," she responded almost immediately. "Mom wants to know if you're coming." I typed and erased several responses. Then I wrote the truth. "I'll think about it." And I did. Not because I owed anyone closure, because I wanted to know what choice felt like without obligation attached. In the end, I didn't go. I sent a gift, a simple one, neutral, thoughtful. Emily didn't thank me. That was fine. That fall, something else happened. A junior colleague at work came to me after a meeting. She looked nervous, unsure. "I don't know how to say no to my boss," she said. "Everyone says I should just be grateful." I recognized that tone, that posture. "You don't need permission to take up space," I told her. "You just need to decide where your line is." She nodded slowly, like someone hearing a language they'd forgotten. I realized then that my story wasn't finished, because it wasn't just mine anymore. Not in a dramatic way, in a quiet one. The kind that shifts culture, one boundary at a time. When Thanksgiving came around, I spent it with friends, chosen family, people who didn't need me to be smaller to feel comfortable. My mother sent a text that morning. "Thinking of you," I replied. "Me too." No guilt, no longing, just acknowledgement. Later that night, as I washed dishes in a warm kitchen filled with laughter, I understood something that would have changed my life years earlier if I had known it then. You don't win by being included. You win by choosing where you belong. The next chapter wouldn't be about forgiveness. It would be about inheritance of a different kind, the one you give yourself. I used to think inheritance was something handed down. Money, property, names etched into documents that decided where you stood without ever asking who you were. That belief died quietly the year after my father stepped away. What replaced it wasn't optimism, it was precision. The company stabilized, not dramatically, not heroically. It simply stopped wobbling. Governance did what governance is supposed to do when it's no longer ornamental. Daniel adjusted to a version of leadership that didn't orbit around approval. He became more cautious, less reactive. Sometimes better, sometimes not. We spoke only when necessary, and when we did, it was clean. No history dragged into the room. No unspoken debts. That was my boundary. At home, my life continued to expand in small, deliberate ways. I enrolled in a certification program I'd postponed for years because it didn't fit the family narrative. I traveled more, alone, on my terms. I started saying no faster, not defensively, just clearly. One evening after a long day, I opened a drawer I rarely touched. Inside were old family documents I'd kept for reference. Letters, notes, photocopies that had once felt heavy with meaning. I realized something as I looked at them. They no longer had power over me. They were records, not weights. I closed the drawer and didn't open it again. The real test came in early winter. My mother was hospitalized briefly. Nothing life-threatening. Enough to trigger concern. Daniel called to inform me, his voice clipped procedural. "She's asking for you," he said. I didn't rush. I didn't refuse either. I went the next day. The hospital room was quiet. Too white. My mother looked smaller in the bed, her hands folded, eyes tired but alert. "You came," she said. "Yes," I replied. She studied my face. "You don't look angry anymore." "I'm not," I said. "I'm clear." She nodded slowly. "That might be worse." I smiled faintly. "It's healthier." She asked about my work, my home, my plans. Not probing, not controlling, just listening. Then she said something that surprised me. "I didn't know how to love you without managing you," she said. By the time I realized it, I didn't know how to stop. I didn't reach for her hand, but I didn't pull away either. "I know," I said. That was all. When I left, I felt something close to relief. Not reconciliation. Release. Weeks later, a package arrived at my door. No return address. Inside was a small wooden box. Inside that, a ring. My grandmother's. A note in my mother's handwriting explained that she'd kept it for years, unsure who to give it to. That she'd finally understood it wasn't about tradition. It was about recognition. I didn't put the ring on. I placed it in my desk drawer, not as a trophy, as a marker. Because inheritance, I realized, isn't about what you're given. It's about what survives you. That winter, I hosted a small gathering at my home. Friends, colleagues, people who knew me as I was, not as a role I filled. Someone asked about my family. I didn't give a long answer. "I have one," I said. "It just looks different than it used to." No one pressed. As the night wound down and the house quieted, I stood alone for a moment, looking at the life I'd built without asking permission. I thought about the girl I'd been, the one who stayed quiet because she thought love was conditional. I wished I could tell her one thing. You're not difficult. You're discerning. The final chapter wouldn't be about closure. It would be about choosing yourself without apology and walking forward without looking back. The last thing I signed wasn't a legal document. It was a decision. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning, the kind that used to make me restless because nothing dramatic was happening. No crisis, no tension, no one demanding anything from me. I was standing in my kitchen, coffee cooling on the counter, sunlight cutting across the floor when my phone buzzed with an email notification. From my mother. Short, polite, careful. "Your father's birthday dinner is this Saturday. Daniel will be there. It would mean a lot to him if you came. No guilt this time. No pressure dressed up as concern. Just an invitation." A year earlier, that message would have hijacked my entire day. I would have weighed consequences, imagined conversations, rehearsed responses. I would have asked myself what a good daughter would do. This time I asked a different question. Do I want to be there? I sat down at the table and let myself answer honestly. No, not out of spite, not out of anger, but because I knew exactly how it would feel. The subtle tension, the careful words, the unspoken expectation that my presence would signal forgiveness, compliance, a return to something that no longer existed. I typed a response. "I hope you have a nice evening. I won't be able to attend." Then I added one more line. "I'm doing well, and I hope you are too." I hit send and didn't wait for a reply. That was the moment I knew the story had ended. Not because everyone apologized. Not because justice was loudly served. Not because my family suddenly transformed into people they'd never been. But because I no longer needed anything from them to move forward. The company continued without drama. My role remained defined, respected, and limited by my own choosing. Daniel and I developed a functional distance that neither of us tried to close. Emily became a stranger whose life intersected with mine only on paper. My parents aged quietly into a version of themselves that no longer ruled my decisions. And I lived, Not in rebellion, in alignment. I moved again this time by choice. A smaller place closer to the water, fewer rooms, more light. I donated furniture I didn't love, threw out paperwork I didn't need, simplified in ways that felt symbolic and practical at the same time. One afternoon, while sorting old files, I came across the original settlement offer they'd made me, the one that would have paid me to disappear. I looked at the number and felt nothing. No regret, no temptation, just clarity. They thought money was the price of silence. They were wrong. Silence was the price of access to me, and it was no longer for sale. The quiet revenge no one warns you about is this: when you stop reacting, the people who relied on your reactions lose their power. There was no confrontation at the end, no final argument, no dramatic farewell, just a series of small, consistent choices that added up to something unrecognizable to the people who thought they owned me. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped defending my boundaries. I stopped hoping to be chosen. And in doing so, I chose myself. If you're listening to this and you recognize that tight feeling in your chest, the one that comes from always being the reasonable one, the flexible one, the one who understands while being quietly diminished, hear this clearly. You are not too sensitive. You are not selfish. You are not breaking the family. You are responding to a system that only worked when you stayed small. Walking away doesn't make you cruel. Staying doesn't make you loyal. What matters is whether you are allowed to exist fully in the space you're standing in. I didn't burn bridges. I simply stopped crossing them alone. And the moment I did, I discovered something that no inheritance, no approval, no apology could ever give me: peace that didn't require permission. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been excluded, controlled, or erased by the people who were supposed to protect you, I'd love to hear your story. Leave a comment, share your experience. And if you want more stories about boundaries, betrayal, karma, and the quiet power of choosing yourself, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with me. Some endings aren't loud. They're final. And they're yours.